how do you hire really important key candidates for roles?
Somebody who's just going to really change the trajectory of your business.
I've seen this go sideways in so many different ways.
I have so many thoughts on this. I'll let you go first.
Yeah. The first thing I would say is, as a leader, you have to do it yourself. Just recently, I was talking to somebody who's getting quoted by Zuckerberg for a role in Meta, and Zuck just sent him a cold email. Reference checks are some of the most underutilized tools in the tech industry for interviewing. So many people just botch this. If you remember nothing else from the episode, if you get the process part right,
just do the simple things, right? These are life skills that we've sort of learned the hard way. And so there is just this art form to the whole thing. Yes. And the worst kind of hiring I've seen is
the best CEOs I know are always doing this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of the Aarthi and Sriram show. And in today's episode, we want to talk about something that comes up a lot when we talk to founders, CEOs, something that we've experienced a lot, which is hiring. And to be specific, we want to talk about how do you hire really important key candidates for roles. And key could mean anything. It could mean a new executive. If you are an early founder, this could mean closing that amazing engineer or designer, or it could mean hiring somebody to run a new part of your company. But it's sort of key and important, as opposed to maybe something more run of the mill. So
I think we look at it as a 10x person is sort of one way to think about it. Silicon Valley is now all about the 10x engineer, the 10x whoever. But I sort of see the key hire role as really helps accelerate from your current state of being. And if it is a very large organization, is this person going to make a tectonic shift, a fundamental change in the trajectory of the business or velocity of the business? With early stage founders, that first hire who is able to really move the company forward. And so those are the people that we're going to focus on today. Yeah.
Something Aarthi and I have done many, many times. We help people with this many times. Sometimes we've been courted on the other side of this well and not so well. And maybe let me start off by this. I think the first thing I would say is when you're trying to get a key hire in is that if you are the leader, and that could mean the CEO often, that means the leader of the division or whatever the case may be, you have to do this yourself. And what this means is that this has to be a priority for you.
Yeah.
You have to be actively spending time on it every week, if not every day. You have to track progress and success. You have to be in the weeds. You have to be talking to candidates. You have to be interviewing them. We're going to talk about all of that. But the first thing I would say is, as a leader, you have to do it yourself.
Do you have to do the whole pipeline, the whole stack yourself, or can you outsource to recruiters? What's your take on that?
I think there's some element of it you can eventually outsource to a recruiter.
Okay.
But I would say the best hires I've seen done, even to this day, are by people who do it themselves. Even just recently, I was talking to somebody who's, getting quoted by Zuckerberg for a role in Meta, and Zuck just sent him a cold email saying hey, I would like to talk to you about this very interesting role for Meta. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg sends you an email, you tend to respond. And that kind of gives you a flavor of how you have to be involved. I think recruiters are very interesting and important in a few ways. One is obviously they have existing relationships and a bigger pipeline they can bring to bear. But I do think there's some pitfalls, which we'll get to. But I think I've never seen this work when it's not a priority. For example, examples where it's not a priority is, let us say, for example, you have a meeting every couple of weeks and you're hey, we're supposed to close this key hire. What is happening? Who's doing the process? And why are we seeing more candidates? And that I spoke to one person, didn't work out. They're never going to succeed. You have to make it your project. So that's maybe the number one lesson.
Yeah. I also think when you say you, it is that the hiring manager or the person to whom this person will report to, or you're the founder. That's the you here. Sometimes I've seen this where there is intent. You want to be able to hire. But as a founder, especially if you're a late stage founder, one of the pitfalls I've seen, or this bad pattern I've seen, is they look at other big successful companies like a Microsoft or Adobe or whatever, and they'd be that exec seems to have this swarm of people and have this whole process and this resume pile, screen 1,000 resumes to get. That's what I want to do.
Okay.
You sort of big company your way into this thing and start to apply all the bureaucratic functions at a much earlier stage than you need to, just because you want to project this sense of we are bigger, we are serious, we are more mature.
You're LARPing.
And you don't really need, like, the biggest advantage you have is that it is you who fundamentally cares about this. This is not decision made by a committee and nobody else needs to sign off except you. I would almost use it as like your advantage and your strength and like really run with it. But to Sriram's point, it has to come from you.
Right.
Like it's a one person whose butt is on the line to be able to close this hire.
Yes. So I think that's number one. I'm going to roll out a bunch of cliches in this episode, even more so than usual. The first thing I would say is you have to always be hiring. And my favorite example of this is a scene from the first Avengers movie.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
There's a great scene where they're on the flying ship and Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., is with the Hulk, Bruce Banner, and they're kind of working on some technology thing. And Stark, in Iron Man, he runs this big company, organization, and there's a scene where he says, hey, you know what did you think about joining us at Stark?
Thought about
Stark Industries? We'll set up a whole floor, we'll do this whole thing for you. And
he's pitching, right?
He's pitching. And he's hiring, and he's
and
like...
this is like the CEO of Stark Industries.
Exactly, right? He's like a Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk like character. And so that's fascinating because he spots this guy, he's like, this guy's brilliant. They're off busy trying to save the universe. But on the side note, he's like, hey, by the way, if we're all alive at the end of this, we should talk and you should come on to work. And it's probably clear he has no idea what the role is going to be, but he's like, we'll figure it out. And the best CEOs I know are always doing this. Whenever they meet someone interesting, whether or not that person's interested right now, whether or not you have a role for them right now, you're always trying to say, hey, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
You should have a conversation. And you never know what this leads to. You may never know whether that person may just say no forever. They may have a friend or they may wind up joining years later. But the best CEOs are always recruiting.
The best CEOs I've seen spot talent. They spot ability. They also are very deeply attuned to, can this person get there? Like it's almost like this, they can sort of like see this graph where like they're here, but if they join me and this is our mission, can they get there to be able to get my company here?
Right.
Sort of thing. Like it's almost like you have to bet on this person to be able to bet on yourself.
Yes.
And sort of like these two lines sort of like need to meet at some point and they can like see that like line through to be able to happen. Because chances are, you meet somebody who's like very interesting, very smart, very curious, very hungry, but they're not quite there. They don't have the right skill set. So you're going to have to like train them, teach them, tell them what you do, tell them why this could be interesting. But I've seen the best CEOs who can like see through all that and be able to build this like future timeline where things can work.
Yeah. Now, this is very interesting because I think there's a part of what you're saying, which is some of the best hires are a long-term relationship seduction.
Yes.
And the reason I say this is a common mistake I often see founders make, even some successful ones. So they would do this. They'd be like, I need to hire someone interesting, like a VP of engineering, a CFO, my head of all things AI or some such thing, right? They get sent a senior candidate, maybe somebody from Google or Meta, and they go, well, hey, let's have a coffee. And you're like, hey, here's the mission of our company. And I'm obviously very pumped up because this is my life's work. You should think of joining us. And that other person's obviously polite, they have a good conversation, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And the reason why this almost never goes
I've seen people come to you and be like, wait, I'm trying to close this person. I had dinner with them, but they don't seem to be interested. What did I do wrong?
Yes, absolutely, right? And there's a bunch of mistakes that people are making.
Yeah.
First of all, your company is your life's work. You've spent years, convincing yourself of it, understanding the narrative. It's like any relationship or ideology takes time to build up.
Yeah.
The person you're meeting, has no concept of this, right? So, for example, I often talk to founders, they're like, I met this person, but they're not motivated by a mission. I'm like, yeah, because they've listened to it for 30 minutes, right? Yeah. There is no way you can be able to be motivated by something you listen to for 30 minutes. These things take time to marinate. Think of your favorite sports team or your favorite movie star. Those things take years to build up. So, first of all, this is a long-term thing, right?
It's the same way, whether you're a founder or you're like a mid-level manager or like an exec at a company, you need to give them time to really understand what you're trying to do or what you want to get out of it. And it is a incentive alignment process.
Yes.
And it is also a process where you really have to like get to know each other and understand each other and figure out who this person is and what are they excited by.
Yes.
And if you don't spend the time putting in the effort to do it, they can sense it. They can sense that you're just trying to shortcut your way through to like getting somebody to fix this problem that you have in your company.
Yes.
And the worst kind of hiring I've seen is like, let's catch up. It's been a while. And you sit down and you meet for coffee. Like, I'm hiring for this role. Are you interested?
And I'm like, oh my God, I know how to kill the next 60 minutes of conversation.
You know that this is all downhill from there.
Yeah.
And the worst is, then you're like trying to be very, really polite, where you're like, I can offer other candidates, let me talk to people. But you realize that they're not interested in you as a person. And that always shows.
Yes.
They're always interested in the problem statement in their head, which you do not give a shit about, because you're just like trying to catch up with this person.
Yep.
And it's very transactional, and these transactional conversations don't go anywhere.
Well, that is an element of this. I tell some of my founders this, they'd be like, well, when the other person catching up for coffee, it's a little bit like a date, right? I'm not saying they're not interested. There's some level of like, if you're meeting, there's somebody interested in you or your company, but they may not be just there yet. And so often I think the right thing to do is, first of all, don't just talk to somebody when you're trying to hire for that role right then, especially if somebody's very important. You want to have multiple encounters.
Yeah.
You want to get to know them. They need to get to know you. Plus, they may be in a spot in career life where they're just not ready. Maybe they need financial stability, or maybe their significant other is going through a job change and they want to be stable. So they may just not be ready. And so what you want to do is like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to put pressure on you. Let's keep talking. And keep talking could mean let's have chat every 5-6 months.
Yeah.
Let's do something socially.
Yep.
Or one of my favorite things to do is like, okay, you know what? Why don't you just come hang out at the office for a few hours, talk to some of our people, give us some thoughts and advice, and just kind of find a way to bring them into your world without having to do the hard sell.
Yeah, I agree with that. The thing I love the most, and I've actually used this in many interesting ways, is to give them a problem statement that you genuinely have, not some fake thing, and say, I'm really struggling with this thing.
Right.
How would you solve this for me? Or how would you think about solving this? It doesn't even have to be for me. You don't have to work here, anything. But man, I'm like really struggling with this thing. And it could be like a piece of code. It could be a feature you're trying to build. It could be anything, right? But they need to see that, wow, this is what I get to do if I could work here. These are the things that I could get energized by. And they need a bit of that too.
Yes.
And I think the best people I've seen almost always are excited by the prospect of, would I get to do this if I worked here? Oh my God. And one, they're excited to solve the problem with you. Two, they sort of you get to work with each other, get to know each other more, but find ways to sort of mimic that working relationship before you start trying to aggressively pitch them and get them on board and do all of that.
Yeah. Look, if your company is a rocket ship and it's hot, all these things don't matter, but otherwise matter. I'll tell you, the Aarthi is the reference is one dinner where we met a friend of ours, ex-friend of ours. Ex-friend of ours. I'll keep the details anonymous. And
that friend has been cancelled.
Yeah, it's an ex-friend. He's the parrot from the Monty Python sketch. And at the time, I had just taken on a new role. I was very excited about it. I remember this. And I was like, it's one of these like, oh, I just joined this place. I forgot it was Twitter or something. And I was like, I'm just joined this place. And the first response was like, great. We are hiring for this head of whatever. You should come join us. And I remember it makes me like so angry, right? Yeah. And I was like, wait, I just told you I'm doing this other thing I'm really excited by. We haven't had any conversation. And you literally just sort of spotted me as kind of this hole in the org chart you need to go fill. And without even talking about the company or whatever, I'd be like, we should go do that. And it just...
but proceeds to spend the next 45 minutes sort of like aggressively pitching Sriram to be... And I think the worst kind of pitches are not just the ones that are like, hey, you should come work here, do this. The worst things, in my opinion, is the ones where they diss your current state of employment.
Yes.
Where they'd be like, but why do you have to do this other thing? But, that's like really not that exciting. Oh, you report to like that guy? Oh, that guy sucks. And you're like, why would you undermine me and my identity? Because, this is sort of like what I'm excited by. And now in like one fell swoop, you made me really dislike both you and this future prospect of working with you.
I think I know the reason part of why is because people have taken the long lesson from the Steve Jobs sugar water story, right? Okay. Which is Steve Jobs talks to John Scully, I was at Pepsi at the time, and he says, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugar water, right?
Yeah.
But the reason it works is, number one, that was Steve Jobs. Second was, Scully was in a mindset where he was like unhappy and he was willing to be moved over. And also it was Apple, which had like a mission statement. So a lot of these factors have to be right. Like you may not be Steve Jobs, your company's mission or whatever motivates you may be different. And so there's a lot of factors. So that's number one. Okay. Yeah. So, enough of bad dinners, Aarthi. and I have had. But we still haven't met that person.
We're a bit sore about
Yes,
that.
that
Yeah.
hasn't been cancelled. No Christmas cards. Now, next up, the other thing I think about is it's very hard for founders to hire for a role where it is not the role they are familiar with. For most common case would be if you're trying to hire for a finance person or a CFO
Yeah.
or a lawyer, a legal general counsel.
Yeah.
So a lot of founders come from
Yeah, you must have seen this with your
yeah,
share
you
of portfolio companies.
But
And-
myself, right? Like, because a lot of us come from product engineering style backgrounds. And let's say you have to hire your first legal person or your first finance person. You don't really know what a good finance person is, a bad finance person looks like. It
So
takes a while.
What do you do there? I'm curious.
And same with sales too, often with sales. And I think the answer is, the only way to do it is, one is you have to do a calibration. And what I mean by that is, for any role you want to hire, you ask everyone in your network for, hey, introduce me to the top 2-3 people in the world who are good at this kind of thing, right? If you want to hire an engineer, you're not from engineering background, introduce the top 2-3 engineers. I promise you, I will not try and hire them, right? Like, because they might be your own organization, might be a friend.
Yeah.
And I promise you I want to hire them. I just want to meet them and understand how they look, how they talk, how they think. And so maybe you can actually hire them later if things go well, but that's not what you're trying to do. And you want to kind of build a mental model of how does a really good look like?
Yeah.
What do they talk about? Maybe you ask them what they look for. That's number one. The second part is, kind of a plug. This is where you get your venture capitalists or your friends involved.
Yeah.
If you have friends who have done this, you'll be like, hey, can you help me interview this person? Because you have done this role before, you've seen them, so help me interview these people before. But unless you've seen great and good, you will not be able to tell the good versus bad. Like, for example, with sales, right? With a lot of founders, young founders, when they try and hire salespeople are always good at presentation. They're very good at selling themselves. That's a job. And you have no way of telling, like, well, is this person good at their job?
Yeah.
And to understand the dynamics, understand the questions, it takes a while. So I would say knowing the good, bad, calibrating them, and then also getting to have your friends or network or VCs involved is key.
I think, this is something that I had to learn the hard way, because when I was starting my companies, I was very hesitant to ask for help. And I also, when I looked at my investors were like, well, I don't know if they actually have experience doing this. And I just refused to sort of seek help. And I think later on, now that, I invest pretty regularly, and we invest in 40 plus companies now, I see this now where, one, I've had nearly 20 years of operational experience where I can pattern match and recognize. But two, I can also just look at it and say, oh, I can help you with that. This is what I would look for. This is what I did for this other company, or this is what that other startup did, sort of things. So I think the thing for me was, you think that these problems and the stuff that you're going through, especially if you're in a startup, is just unique to you, but it probably isn't. And you're going to have to seek help, especially if you have good investors on your cap table, people who've done this before. Ask them. Just put it out there as part of your investor update, or just pick up the phone and call them. Worst, you get, at the absolute worst case, you get told no. But, you should at least ask other people who've done this for a living or have done this over time to be able to get you some help.
Yeah, and for example, they can immediately do things like, for example, even today, if I'm hiring for a sales leader, I don't do interviews. I ask, for example, at the firm I work with, somebody like Joe Morrissey, who's kind of had a lifetime of sales, and be like, hey, talk to this person. And they will immediately spot things.
Yes.
And sometimes they'll call upon me, like, hey, if they're hiring a senior product leader, they'll be like, talk to this person. Because they're just you have years of pattern matching and instinct, which you can't replace.
Yeah.
I think they are asking for meeting people. The best in the world is very, very interesting and key, because I've seen people close angels, investors. For example, there's a company I know which got introduced to Jeff Dean this way of Google.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the best engineer. He's obviously one of the best engineers ever. And he wound up being an advisor or investor in capacity. It's kind of a great way to just kind of build your network, and everyone will do it. But the key is, don't try and hire the person, right? Then you'll never get another introduction. Okay. Running a good loop.
Okay.
We have been on several bad loops on the other side.
As a recipient?
Yes.
Okay.
So running a process for a candidate is probably one of the most key things. Now, you and I have been on both sides. Often we have been on the other side of a bad process.
Like a recipient where we are the candidates.
Yes.
Yes and no. I think I've seen some processes, they've done a really good job. There are almost always, when it goes badly, there is almost always a few things that go wrong. And then we've also done loops ourselves, and we try very hard because we've sort of gone through this, we try and make sure that the process is smooth for candidates that we are hiring.
Yeah. So let's go. Classic mistakes people make.
Yeah.
Number one is not having a process, which is when you have a candidate, you have a couple of good coffees, and everyone's like, well, what's the next step? And you should be like, well, we're going to put you through a process. Okay.
Yeah.
Number two, tell the candidate exactly what the process is going to be, which is how many people you're going to meet, when are you going to meet them, right? Like getting on top of scheduling. Usually you might have somebody else, maybe, somebody from HR, recruitment handler, but even if you're not doing it, you should be like, okay, these are the kinds of people you're going to meet and this is what is going to happen, right? And then the meetings, whether they're on Zoom or in person, they happen on time.
Yeah.
The people who are interviewing them show up prepared.
Yeah.
They know who you are. They are very polite. They make sure you have a good experience. They handle questions. And then if it's maybe a whole day at an office, which is very, very common, somebody's doing the basics of making sure you get a bathroom break, food, water, and escorting you from time to time. If not, you're like, okay, we had this conversation today. In 2 days, you're going to meet this other person. That meeting happens to schedule. 4 or 5 meetings or how many more meetings happen. Then you know exactly that after that, you're like, okay, we're going to make a decision, right?
Yeah.
Very, very rarely, you might say, well, you might have 1 or 2 more people for you to talk to, but that's it. And then you say, I'm going to give you a call and tell you what to decide, right? That is how things are supposed to go. I've seen this go sideways in so many different ways.
I have so many thoughts on this. I'll let you go first.
Yeah. First of all, like nobody knows, like who am I supposed to meet? When? You show up, they have no idea who you are. The people are unprepared. Or you meet somebody and then you're like, I'm meeting somebody else. And they're like, oh no, you come back in 2 more days. And then that never happens. Things keep getting rescheduled, moved. Worst case, you're like, how many more people am I meeting? You just keep throwing more people at me. Yeah. Like, when is that going on? Rudeness, cancellations. Oh my God, there's so many crazy stories.
Okay. So I have a lot of like just very strong views on this. And I try very hard to not repeat these or like at least tell my portfolio companies on what the process should look like. Again, remember, this is for like a key role. There's a key hire, somebody who's just going to like really change the trajectory of your business, right? This is the person you're thinking about hiring. You want to put them through a loop. The feeling that you should have in your head is, from a candidate standpoint, you've done these like dinners or coffee meetings and you've sort of like done this very warm pitching sales process. And now they are like, all right, I'm ready. Let's like figure out what it looks like. And you have to understand from a candidate standpoint that it transitions from this like warm phase to this sort of cold phase because they don't know the other people on your team. They don't know your recruiters or the people handling the loops, your admin, whoever. They are not connected. They're just connected to you. Yeah. They're connected to your company, your mission, your problem statement, your org, all of that. But they know you, right? Like you've been quarterbacking this whole thing as far as they are concerned. And now you're handing this off. And I think this point of handoff is what people go tragically wrong at because the things that, and then everything from here on is like tactics, right? But if you are able to understand that you're transitioning from this warm to cold and you have to ease that temperature setting and the change, a lot of good things can come out of it if you do it right. So the things I've seen that people don't understand or don't really do is handing it off to somebody else, some minion in your team and be like, figure out loops. This is like VP of sales. Make it happen. Yeah. And then the VP of sales, they have a playbook. They're like, all right, VP of sales, who should I like get them to talk to? Okay, yeah, maybe the finance guy, maybe this other guy, maybe this other guy. Oh, who's been doing sales right now? Oh, yeah, that guy. And then, okay, great. And then let's do this HR loop in. Yeah, how do we know if it's good or not? And then they sort of like run the loop with the best of their ability with the framework that they've been given for like a generic person. Yeah. Not for this particular person who you spent all this time trying to get them into the front door. Now they're like ringing the bell and you're just like getting like a random people to like open the door and get them to like get seated somewhere else.
Can I give you my favorite terrible story about this? It happened to me. 11, maybe 12, 13 years ago. I was meeting a friend at Facebook at the time and Facebook was like the hot company. Yeah. And I meet them. And I think that person kind of wants to recruit me. And I was maybe okay being recruited, but I didn't know. And we were just catching up. And we just moved to Silicon Valley. And this person says, oh, wait, you're here, we're hiring, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. And he's like, well, why are you here? You should meet this other guy. Yeah. Right? Who I won't name because I don't know. Let's avoid the names part. So you meet this other guy. So I'm like, wait 10 minutes, meet this other guy. This other guy walks in. And the first thing he says, he's like, so tell me why you want to work at Facebook. I'm like, what? I was saying like, I don't want to work here, right? Like I'm here for coffee, right? Like, and I just met you, right? And he was like, oh, well, you should want to work here. And it was like this total sideways meeting,
Really
right? Like, and it
awkward.
was totally bad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's the
they
thing.
sent me an
right? Like,
apology later, and it's nice. But
yeah, but you have to really understand like the mental state at which this candidate's coming in. They're sort of vulnerable because they sort of put themselves out there. They're here.
they didn't tell their employer they're there.
Yeah, and they also are like not entirely sure. They're just like depending on you, and it is on you as the person who's hiring to make this switch as easy and convenient as possible. So don't outsource that next step. Here is what I would do, right? I would like put together a process that is tailored for this person. I would, whoever, if you don't have the time, whoever you're working with, it's like, hey, this person is really important. This is the context in our dinner or in our coffee. These are the topics that came up. You know, they're thinking about relocation. They're thinking about doing this other thing. They are thinking these are the things they're excited by. Like hand off the context. Then I would say these are the people I would want in this loop. What I would do is also figure out, like, pick up the phone, talk to these folks who are going to be in the loop to be like, I want you to cover this. I want you to cover that. Give them like sense of like capabilities or things that you want to like understand or figure out. And it's not micromanaging. It is on you to figure out how to make this loop as efficient and as good as possible for both sides.
Yes.
So you have to like tightly control the whole experience as much as possible. And then, you know, beyond that, it is all the little things, right? The scheduling,
Yes.
being on top of things. If somebody shows up late, you need to send a note saying, hey, running a few minutes late. You just cannot just like show up. And I've done this where, you know, I've done like a previous loop and then that I couldn't like email this other candidate in the next meeting. So I've like gone late. But just be decent, have dignity for the candidate.
Look, if you are in a big FANG company and you're doing like 10 interviews a week or whatever, this is not what you're talking about. We are talking about this is an existential hire for your company.
Yeah.
They are probably doing great. They're a very senior person or important, whatever they are doing. You don't treat them well. Like, for example, tiny things really matter. I remember, once somebody pointed out that you should never have like a printout of that person's LinkedIn profile when you walk in.
Don't
right?
do
Like,
stuff like
you're
that.
like, because you want to feel like, okay, they are taking me seriously because I'm taking this seriously. I'm coming here. This could be the rest of my career, my life. Look, a lot of it just the basics, right?
Yes.
Treat them decently. Tell them what is going to happen, when it's going to happen.
Yes.
Somebody chaperones them through the process.
And you have to signal that you're taking their time seriously. And it's all the little things that matter. Communication before, communication after, all of that matters, especially if you think that this person's like the star candidate that you would want to have. You need to like put in the effort to make it visible for them. I think there is that part. Then I think, post loop, the follow through. Oh, the other thing I've seen is you have this list of people who this person's supposed to be talking to and looping, right? None of them are talking to each other. I've seen this huge problem where you're like explaining the same thing over and over again to every person and they're like, okay. And you can clearly tell that no one's actually talked to each other.
Yeah.
And they're all sort of like trying to figure out how to slot you in. You can also sense the set of questions where they've already sort of made up their mind about you. Either, they don't really want you because, your boss asked you to like go talk to them. You can sort of like see this politics unraveling in this interview loop, and you don't want all of that, right? Like you just want to come from a place of optimism and earnestness and just like positive some mindset where you want to be like, I want to have the best possible candidate experience. How do I make that happen?
Yes. Now, let us say, now you do the whole interview loop. And by the way, so many people just botch this. If you remember nothing else from the episode, you get the process part right.
Just do the simple
things, right? Like you'll be so far ahead. But outside of that, you make a decision, right? Yes or no. And, with this episode, we won't tell you what is a bad, good, bad, hair. We can do that separately. When you make a decision, if it's yes, we'll talk about that, what happens. But if it's a no, right? Very common mistake I see people make is they kind of totally ghost you. Right? Or you get a cold reply from the HR person saying like, oh, sorry, thank you for your interest. And so you have to remember this from the candidate's perspective, right? You've quoted them, you spent all this time.
You wanted me.
You wanted me. And then you just kind of ghosting me. And so the right thing to do, and also, so the reason why it's important is that person may not be right now, they may be right later. That person may have a friend and that person is going to call them, be like, hey, what do you think of X? And you'll be like, well, X was an asshole. Well, that'll be the end of that. So you want to then mirror it and you want to be like, hey, okay. So listen, we spoke to you, we had this whole conversation, And, we just don't think this is like the right thing right now. And look, I know it's disappointing. We kind of came so far. It's never an easy conversation. But look, most people, as I said, are adults and they get it. And even the little nuances will go a long way in terms of when they want to come back, maybe years later, or if they have a friend. So you want to mirror as much effort you put in on the wooing up to it, as much when you kind of do the end note too.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about reference checks.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah.
David Ilovich, one of my partners, will say reference checks are some of the most underutilized tools in the tech industry for interviewing. And I think it's true. I think they're probably the most important part of interviewing. And there are a few ways I think a lot of people do it wrong. The reason why people do it wrong is they do two things. One is they look at the names that a candidate sends them as a reference at the end of the interview, when the loop, when you already probably made up your mind. Second is you call up each of these people and you do a version of the gotcha version of tell me this person's weakness, okay? Which is...
what do they suck at?
But you kind of do it like... sometimes you think they're smart. You'll be like, oh, if you had to sort of surround them with something, but people can see through. So there are a few mistakes with this. First of all, you have to start doing it through the process. You have to both use the names a candidate gives you and your own network. Again, this is where a VC firm, could wind up really helping. And the reason why you want to do both is the people the candidate gives you they chose them, right? So they obviously think that those people are going to say good things, but you want to do your own homework also.
Yeah.
Now, the people the candidate choose them is very important because if any one of them says something like really negative.
Somewhat negative, it's not because of them saying bad things about the candidates. The candidate didn't know how to pick a reference for them.
Yes, it's just like huge red flag. A huge red flag. So you want to kind of collect this, at least say 7-8 references if for a key hire, maybe a lot more.
Yeah.
And you want to get people to help up. Now, when you call up a reference, right, you have to remember the reference owes you nothing. They owe the candidate a lot.
Yeah.
So what will sometimes happen, like somebody I have no idea with will call me about a friend and try and get some out of me about like, hey, how is this person really bad? And I'm thinking, well, if this person was really bad, I'm not going to tell you because I don't know you. Right? Like, so you kind of have to figure out how to have a positive context reference. So I'm curious, how do you think about this whole thing?
Man, okay. Agree with everything you've said. I think the worst ones are, so it's not even that you owe this person. So let's say, your friend or your former coworker is the candidate. They're very excited about this job. They sort of have an offer, like a verbal, but pending reference checks. So then you are put in as a reference because in the past you'd worked with them. It's sort of like that's sort of how it comes, or you've managed them before, that kind of thing. So you pick up the phone, not because you owe this person a favor, but it's also like the right thing to do. Like in your lives, if you ever have a chance to be a reference of somebody who you're like, who you think very highly of, do it. I think being a good reference is a very important thing to go do. And it's also like, it just wins karma. Yeah. So just like be willing to be a reference. So that's usually how it comes. And I think when they call you, I think, again, it's similar to recruiting where it's like they ping you and say, would you like to be a reference? I need like 15 minutes of your time or 30 minutes of your time for a phone call. I just have these questions of this person, that kind of thing. And you're like, sure. And then they sort of like watch the scheduling because they sort of like outsource this whole thing. And you have to like go deal with this whole like, wait, but you reached out to me. Then their admin would be like, they're available this time, this window, this time, this window. And you're like, wait, but I'm trying to do you a favor.
There's a lot of history here.
So
specific
very
people,
specific things.
Individuals.
Where you're like, wait, what? Like, but I thought I was trying to do this.
Sorry.
What? No.
Not F.
But even like things like that. So, okay, the call happens. And again, to what Sriram said, it's very clearly, what are the things that they were not good at kind of thing. You realize that the point of this reference is for this role in this org, in this stage, with these challenges that you have, how would they be? Right. That's sort of what you're trying to go assess. It is not about what are the things they're not good at.
Right.
That is not relevant to you. I would not expect to find a candidate who's good at like all 5 things. If in fact you do find somebody like that, that's a big red flag because I've seen extremely good candidates spike in 1 or 2 things. And they're generally actually bad at like one thing and sort of average in like the others.
Right.
And you want to basically elevate the spikes and leverage the spikes for problem solving in your org or in your company.
Right.
That's what you want to use them for. I think you've had this experience. I think Ben Horowitz would tell you that people always like spike in a few things and you want to augment the spikes, not so much like level them out and give them feedback on all the negative things.
Yeah. And I'm looking at this tweet thread from David Ilovich at our firm, who's probably one of the best people in references. So I think there's a few questions that I've learned to ask over time.
Yeah.
The first one is, okay, if you know, I think what you want to do is to form a mental picture of this person.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are they good at? What are they bad at? How have they experienced things under pressure? With teamwork, and you want to form a mental 360-degree picture of that person. And the first one is you're trying to figure out is, are their references, if none of the references are widely gushing over them in some way, there's something wrong, right? Like, because by reference, you're generally tuned to be like, okay, this person's great, good. But if no reference is being, oh, this person's amazing, awesome, there's just something totally off, because in generally reference, people are generally trying to be nice and polite. So if no one's like really thrilled about this person, you kind of have to like low pass filter, be like, okay, oh, well, there's something like really off. The second thing is you are trying to form a picture of what has this person actually done and what has come up, not come up. So for example, you're like, hey, this person, this project, what do they do? What are they really good at? And then let's say you ask 2-3 people and you sort of your spidey sense start going off like, well, maybe they were like a great individual rock star, maybe they had some sharp elbows, perfectly fine. Then the next person will be like, hey, so I spoke to a couple of other references. They kind of said this person may have like a couple of sharp elbows. Like, what do you think, right? And you want to kind of form this 360 picture. This is very serious. It has to come from a place of wanting to authentically form a picture of that person as opposed to doing
Judging them,
or what I call like the gotcha question. One great question I learned from Ilovich, which I'm looking at, we should link to it, is he would say, you want to ask this person a reference. You would say, if you knew nothing about what we would do, if you want to ask Joe or Jane, who we are interviewing, what would you have them work on for us? Right? And it's just a great way to elicit out opinions about what they think that person's very good at, how they can fit. And you can take the conversation in any number of interesting ways.
Yep. Okay. I think if it was like head of product, that kind of roles, which I've like had to hire for in the past, I think a lot of it would be, Facebook has this like 3-pronged sort of interview approach. It's like product sense, leadership and drive, execution side of things. So I sort of frame it in that as like in like references to be like, in these set of sort of attributes that we look at, what are they good at? Are they good at leadership? Are they good at people management? Are they good at like product execution? Are they good at like strategy building? So you have to give who you're calling for a reference something to work with on how are you trying to map this person? You can't just arbitrarily be like, is this person good or bad?
Right.
Like that does not give them enough to go with.
By the way, if you're talking to this person at this level, they are not bad. If they're bad, you botch your process by so many levels. You only hear because this person is obviously good. Right? You're trying to form...
And you're trying to figure out in what ways are they good and that do those ways map what you're looking for. And that's really all that you're trying to go find.
Yeah, this is such a great topic. I'm literally writing a note to myself saying we should do an entire episode on doing
just
reference
interviews
checks
and
interviews.
Yeah.
Which maybe brings me to one last topic, which could also be a totally episode in itself, which is closing the hire.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because no hire is just done when you say, okay, this is great. You give them an offer, maybe you negotiate. There's always a closing process. So what this means is you have to figure out what it's going to take and do everything it takes to get that person over the line of them joining you.
Yeah.
And this could mean anything and everything. I have a couple of fun stories. One is
and you need to do that. You as the hiring manager need to be the one
personally,
doing it.
not your HR person, not your recruiter.
Don't send a cold note.
Yeah. First of all, this is where you go all out. This is, by the way, a good VC firm should be able to help you. I'll give a couple of good stories. One is there's a great story from, the book's called, I think, E-Boys. It's about how the benchmark team wound up working with eBay and back in the late 90s. And they talk about how they hired Meg Whitman. And Meg was kind of this, I think she worked in, I forget where she worked in, this toy company somewhere. She was a very senior exec even then. And they wanted to hire her. And so they fly her over and she has I think a kid or more than one kid. And the entire like team, the VCs, everyone's like, they need to hire her as CEO, and they're putting all this work to be like, okay, how do we get her, right? And so they're doing things like, oh, your kid needs to go to school here, like, we'll find a school, and there's this hilarious moment which remembers where like she has a teenage kid or something, and one of the other people who has a teenage kid, maybe they can start dating. They're just thinking like every single angle, right?
Yeah, like thought through. It's great.
Like how do you actually get this person? Like I've seen people who like make sure their spouses get a job. Like basically you're like, okay, every objection this person has, how do we remove it? Or how do you make them enthusiastically so happy? It's never really just about comp. It's a whole thing. Sometimes the very little symbols matter, and I want to tell this story, which is, when I was getting, I was going through this process at Twitter many years ago, and when the whole thing was done, and I was in some negotiation process, and we had a birthday dinner, And
yeah, so you had to like. I think I remember there was a call that afternoon.
Yeah.
Where like there's like laid out the offer, whatever.
Yeah,
I think you're like verbal accepted or
not.
something.
I don't think not yet. I think so. What was happening was I had got an offer. I hadn't accepted. It was on my birthday, and you had booked us a dinner at
this like Indian
restaurant in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So what happened was like I spoke to this recruiter. And I was like, "Oh, thank you for the offer. Let me think about it. But I'm going over for dinner." And she asked me, like, "Oh, where are you going?" I'm like, "Oh, it's my birthday. So Aarthi booked this dinner at this restaurant." That's all I said. And anyway, so we go to the dinner, and 1 hour later, and this bottle of champagne shows up, right? Yeah. And I'm looking at you.
We're sitting down. And, it's like a birthday dinner. So we're like sort of like, oh, we're just happy, excited. And we look at the menus and stuff. And then this like, this host comes in with like this big bottle of champagne. And I look at Sriram and I'm like panicking because I'm like, wrong table. I did not order this champagne. I did, this is not.
You're not spending the money on that.
And I'm like, what? And Sriram looks at me and he's looking happy. And I'm like, oh God, like, how do I tell him? Like, this is not from me.
Yeah.
And I think they say something like, there's a bottle of champagne from Twitter or something.
Yep.
And we both look at each other completely shocked. And, the recruiter had no reason to go do this. They just went out of their way.
Yeah,
there was this nice little card too.
So I want to make sure I get the name right. So this was, I want to give it a shout out. This was Katie Marcotte at Twitter. At the time at Twitter. Let me look. She's at Patreon now. So Katie, what she'd done was, we were having this conversation. I just given the name of the restaurant.
Yeah.
That is it, right?
That's it.
She went and called the restaurant. And she was very confused because she was like, there was no reservation under my name.
Yeah.
So she couldn't figure it out. She asked for a Mrs. Krish. And so she Googled us, figured out who you were, got the reservation name and said something to you.
Mad props.
And the funny thing is like that champagne cost like $100 or something. But I remember that symbol because like, it was all the little effort that somebody had put in.
Yeah.
Which I think in some ways moved the needle for me accepting an offer. So Katie, shout out. But it's all these little gesture because all it's doing is like showing them they care and they're putting an effort to make sure your life is kind of taken care of with them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do the little things. And also, look, this is also when it comes to saying a no, right? You need to be the one who owns that. I had this like once a really bad experience where I have one good experience and one bad experience. The good experience was when I was getting recruited at Netflix. The recruiter had reached out and they pitched me this role. At that time, I was working on this like compiler, runtime, like low-level developer stuff. And so the role at Netflix was to build like some version of that for the Netflix streaming side of things. And I was very excited about it because I could like go build this thing. And it also meant like for us to move to Silicon Valley from Seattle. So, I went through this thing. And then, a couple months later, or a couple weeks later, the recruiter calls me and she says, you didn't get this role. You are a bit overqualified for this role that we are looking for because these are sort of the skill set and like level of experience that we need. But clearly you've done like more than that and this is not the right role for you. But we have this other role. And if you're willing to wait for a couple of months, we have this other role that we're going to open up that is like about building the SDK.
Yeah.
And it's like sort of adjacent to what you have, but I think that is the role that is more suitable for you. But the bad news is that role does not open right now. And it's subject to a bunch of things. And I just want to let you know that this is a no, but if you'd be interested in us, we would love to do that. And if that is a serious role, we will shortcut through the recruiting process, given that you've already run through all of these hoops. And we can make that like a accelerated thing. You still have to talk to the right team, but we can make that go quickly when it opens up. How do you feel? And a part of me felt really good about it because one, they were very human about it. They told me exactly what had happened through the process, how their thinking was, all of that. It was a rejection, but it made me feel like I had the choice at the end of the day to figure out whether I wanted to do this or not. That was very good. The bad one was, did this endless loop. They flew me to San Francisco, same time, endless loop all day. But they put me at this hotel next to this thing, and it was like the first product role. Clearly, they didn't know what they were looking for. It was like late stages startup, like a head of product thing. And so at like 6 p.m., I'm exhausted. They've had like 8 loops through the entire day. And then they were like, well, we need some more time. When's your flight back? And I'm like, well, it's okay. I can move it to tomorrow. Like, okay. And then like another guy comes in, and then another person comes in. By now, it's like 9 p.m., 10 p.m.
Yeah.
I can't even think straight, right? I'm just like, oh God, like this is just such a bad experience. And I could clearly tell, like what I said earlier, nobody had actually talked to each other. So they're all asking the same questions over and over again. And they're starting to like, I'm just like worn out. And then I fly back the next day. I send like a polite thank you notes to everybody on the team and everything. I look them up, all of that. And clearly I made the trip. I'm interested in this role. A week goes by. Nobody returns a thank you notes. Nobody even says anything. Recruiter doesn't get in touch. Nothing, right? And 2 weeks go by, nothing. And I'm just like, okay, I guess that's a no. But I'm just feeling so like bitter about this whole thing. And also, the other practical thing is they made me fly in, they made me book a hotel. They said they were going to expense it. They never did.
Yeah.
And so I sent the HR a polite note being like, hey, are you guys going to like expense
Hopefully
this?
all the founders listening to this, like, we at least get the lesson of like learning a good process.
I'm like, I literally sent a note being like, can you expense my stuff? Because it's actually quite a bit. And then the HR person sent me this note being like, oh yeah, sure, send us the receipts, but make sure that it's like a photo of this thing and it's itemized. And I was like, you didn't even tell me if it was like a yes or a no. And you just like sort of gave me this whole process on expensing this thing.
Yeah.
To this day, I've not heard from them. Many years later, I met the founder at a conference. And I think he sort of knew what he did because he sort of like acknowledged it. Because he courted me for this whole thing and made a big push, and then they just never like got back to me. Don't do that. Don't be that. That was such a bad experience for me.
Episode, I would say. I think just back on the topic of closing a hire, let's see. I think we should do an entire episode on how to overcome objections and closing it. But I think the key bits are it is a 360-degree thing on everything in their life.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes founders think, oh, it's just about compensation. It is not. It is about everything from what their significant other or their spouse thinks. It is about how they feel about their current job. It is about
their learning, what they want to achieve, what their career outcomes look like, where they want to relocate, like a lot of practical things. I've actually seen candidates who, for the right role, they would be willing to take a pay cut because they believe in the opportunity of it. So don't think it is about money. Don't think it is about equity. It's just not that as straightforward.
You need to figure out, maybe it's like getting the kids in school. Or, when I used to be at Snapchat, we used to figure out how to get a lot of spouses jobs in LA because at the time you need to get people to move to LA and there was not a lot of tech jobs in LA. So it has to be a whole 360-degree thing. And but if it all goes well, that person says yes, great. Now, here's the key part. You don't want to forget this, right? Like you want to make sure from then all the way to when they start, after they start, you have great connection tissue. Maybe you're grabbing coffee with them. Maybe they say I can start right away. Maybe they're saying they can start 3 months from now or 4 months from now, whatever the case may be. You're like, okay, great. We're going to work with you. And when they start, you have great experience. So you can kind of see the sense of like, it is a process. It is about telling them, hey, we're going to value you once we figure it's a good fit. And then keeping up with that, regardless of how the process works out. If it's a yes, then keeping up with it all the way to the start. But we have a lot more to cover here.
We have a lot to cover here. Yeah, we're just like running short on time. But I would love to do another one on just how to close candidates, how to do a loop properly, things like that. I think these are like so important and essential. And maybe you're like listening to this saying, I'm so early in my career, or I'm just like getting started as a founder. I'm like just like a first time people manager. It's not relevant to me, but it is. Like a lot of these are like human skills, communication skills, how to empathize with the other person, how to incentive align with the other person. And I think these are like life skills that we've sort of like learned the hard way, mostly by being recipients, sometimes, on the other side of it. And we've, hired directly or indirectly hundreds of people now. And so there is just this like art and just this art form to the whole thing.
I love it. Okay. Well, hope you folks like it. We're going to do more on this. But until then, same bad time, same bad channel. Thank you.
See you.